what got me here today was a notice on the huddle about the Society of Veteran Disability Examiner PAs. I didn't know anything about it. I sent an email to the address that was there, and Kristen got back to me, and we had a nice little chat and ended up with this. We're having hopefully a nice little chat. I like to go through some prepared or semi-prepared remarks, as I said, and then I'll be happy to have a discussion with you all. I know you have tremendous experience and insights of your own, and I think if we share them all, it'll be to our mutual benefit. Now, I don't know if you're interested in history, but 10 days and 159 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln concluded his second inaugural address stating, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace amongst ourselves and with all nations." And lo and behold, we've honored Lincoln's commitment by having the Veterans Administration taking care of that. Now, it was gender inappropriate for now because many of our veterans are women, which is great. But in any case, veterans are no longer being ignored the way they had been in the past. Our philosophy in military medicine was sort of that we had a responsibility to you as our service member. We want you to take care of the job. That's important, but we want to take care of you. And if you got damaged, we wanted to make it right to the extent we can. It was sort of a you break it, you buy it kind of thing. So it's nice to know that responsibility was not shirked, but was taken care of. Now, why do we become PAs? We want to take care of people. And I was very inspired to learn of the group's existence, focusing on veterans. There are many, many, many veterans. And what do these veterans have in common? Well, they all took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that they'll bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that they will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me. True. So they gave, and we're giving back and taking care of them. Now, I'm not going to talk about the VA from the perspective of 40,000 feet. That's above my pay grade. But I am going to offer a personal perspective. I want you to remember that Army aviation is predominantly rotary wing. Helicopters don't fly that high. I will offer the nap of the earth low-level perspective. That's below treetop level. And the perspective that I gained from 25-year involvement with Army aviation. And I want to share a fact check. Helicopters actually can fly to 40,000 feet. The world record is 42,500 feet, but it wasn't an Army helicopter. So in my mind, that doesn't count. There is, however, one helicopter that makes me exceedingly proud, not so much to be a veteran, an American, but a human being. What was that? We have flown a helicopter on Mars, the Ingenuity Mars helicopter, and that flew at an equivalent Earth altitude, 87,000 feet. That technology just blows my mind. It was really disappointing to learn that it had its last flight. It was last month, not terribly long ago, but it was supposed to fly for a month, and it flew for 3 years and something like 72 missions. But I guess it's not a veteran. We get back to some of my experience. When I left active duty in 1969, the word was spread to not reveal any medical issues. Nothing that could potentially delay your getting off active duty. Nobody wanted that. We just wanted to go home. But also, there was no thank you for your service. Ken, I'm sure you can appreciate that a lot more than most of us. None of us had faith in the system. We didn't even know what the system was. And frankly, I'm not sure that I know what it is in many aspects now. The VA to us was a black hole for old men. And I say men because there were not too many female veterans back then. But it was just an unknown and something that we didn't want to interfere with the rest of our lives. I was a reservist assigned to an Army General Hospital, and we sometimes did our training at VA facilities where our prejudices were pretty much reinforced, mostly old men, um, pretty much veterans of World War II and the Korean conflict back then. An occasional service member who had served in World War I, none from the Spanish-American War. I think we just missed the last of those. And there were almost no veterans from Vietnam. And again, the N of women was quite low. In 1976, I became a PA, and in 1977, a reserve component PA. My exposures to the VA were infrequent. I didn't have any in PA school or none during the 2 residencies I did. We can talk about those later if you wish. When I did visit the VA as a PA, I noticed that the demographic was changing. The patients were getting younger, but there were more female veterans. Not a lot, but more. Also, my status now as a medical officer, I noted that a number of veterans had service-related issues that had not been appropriately documented during their service. And this was a consequence of not revealing those conditions that could have delayed their discharge from active duty. This became especially obvious to me when I was mobilized for Desert Shield and Storm. I was involved with the demobilization of a National Guard brigade. The lack of appropriate documentation made it challenging for them to get the care they needed. This was really a problem. And these problems can be lifelong. It was not fair to them that we didn't do the best job we could have in the documentation. I know as a junior clinician, you think of paperwork as a necessity, or now the the electronic medical records. You feel like you're treating the computer rather than the patient. That's not what it's about. That's not why we became PAs. But if it's not documented, it hasn't happened, especially when you're dealing with the bureaucracy, whether it be military or anything else. Now, the sequelae of inadequate documentation of these service-related medical issues stayed with me for the remainder of my military medical career. By the way, that turned out to be 40 years. When I deployed for Operation Iraqi Freedom, and before we left the theater, I sat down with every single soldier in my task force and made sure that we made annotations in their health record for every single issue that occurred during their active service. I did not want them to face unnecessary obstacles while trying to get care later. It made a difference. Now, I want to raise a point of distinction between addressing medical issues on active duty versus reserve duty, because in the VA, you're going to see both kind of folks. But on active duty, if you have a medical issue, you get treated. Again, you break it, you buy it. On reserve duty, you only get treated if you're having a medical emergency or if you're on active duty status. For non-emergent issues, you get sent to civilian clinicians to take care of you. I found this a little puzzling at first because we often had great medical expertise, clinicians who knew how to diagnose and treat, and we often had the supplies to do that. What we did not have was the ability to provide follow-on care. So we could do initial treatment, but without follow-up, that's terribly unfair to the patient, the service member who was hurt. So now I pointed out that I had 25 years of practice in aviation medicine. Like occupational medicine, this is a subset of preventive medicine. Our mission was to optimize the safety of those involved with aviation. Now, this includes not only flight personnel, but also the people who support them. We've heard the phrase, it takes a village. Well, the other villagers include those who maintain both the aviation and non-aviation environments, including facilities as well as aircraft. It could be the workshops, the airfield itself, cooks, everyone who helps the mission get accomplished. Nobody can do it alone. I mean, the glamour is certainly for the one in the cockpit, but the person in the cockpit is there to support the people on the ground. And it takes all of us to do it right, all of us to make it a safe mission. Lives really do depend on it. Now, these lives included ours too, because we flew the aircraft that were maintained, as well as flying in them. And this certainly is a motivation to make sure you do your job well. It's one thing to give somebody a pill and say bye-bye. It's another thing to strap on an aircraft and go for it. So that's an incentive that we don't see a lot of, certainly not on the civilian side, whatever. It helped keep us honest. But I don't think that was really an issue, because part of the honesty was the fact that these are our people. What do you mean our people? We lived with them. On active duty, we lived with them. We ate what they ate. We slept where they slept. All the same. You're taking care of one another, which is quite different than what we have on the civilian side, when people come in and see you for an appointment and you take care of them and bye-bye. But you know that the people who you're with 24/7, sometimes in very austere and nasty environments, they're your buddies. You want to do right by them. Even Navy corpsmen can, right?
Yes, sir.
So on active duty, when there were issues, it was really easy to do the right thing. We owned the service member, and we just did what we needed to get them the care they needed. On reserve duty, we said we couldn't treat. Well, what could we do? How could we preserve the assets, these human assets? Well, what we did was serve as consultants to civilian clinicians who provided their care. Someone could have, let's say, hypertension. And let's say the treatment that was their primary care provider wanted to give them was a beta blocker. That's fine if you're just walking around the streets. And it's probably okay if you're deployed to an environment where you have access to beta blockers. But wait, beta blockers decrease your tolerance to G-forces. Not so good for aviation. So we had access to information, specialist information, that they didn't have. And we could give them, we could offer these options, and hopefully they could provide treatments that would have the least impact on the service member's life. We really didn't want to ground people, that is, prevent them from doing their aviation duties. We wanted to do all we could to keep them up and flying. I know the biggest joy I would get with people who had conditions that were by regulation disqualifying, find the appropriate treatments and management so they could keep doing what they were doing. I had one pilot who flew in Vietnam, the first Gulf War, and OEF and OIF. And he had an issue that would potentially grounding, and we managed to find a way to keep him up. I mean, he had tens of thousands of flight hours. You don't want to waste that. And if he couldn't do his job safely, that's okay. But if he was flying with another pilot, all to the good. So being able to preserve people's lives and careers is just priceless. Now, dealing with these issues that come up in large organizations, you need to have standards so everybody's treated consistently, no matter where they are, in the United States or deployed on the other side of the world. Regulations provide authority for setting and implementing these standards. The Army regulation is numbered 40-501, Standards of Medical Fitness. Great. It has chapter number 4 that has all the medical fitness standards for flying duty. So this tells you if you have any of these, you can't do it. But there's additional guidance, at least on Army aviation, and I think it may be the other services too, things called aeromedical policy letters, which give you the guidance on how to evaluate a condition and do what can be done to maintain the fitness of your soldier. So how does this relate to what you do? Well, I'm not sure quite there yet. Military's goal is always to accomplish the mission. And we want to do this with the least risk possible. And we know that risk can never be eliminated, but we can reduce it. And one of the things we can do in medicine is to optimize people's health. Now, the tools for this in the military are no different than any other good medical practice: diet, sleep, exercise, immunizations, etc. The bottom line for our assessment was to look at the service member from three perspectives. First, as a human being. Second, as a soldier. And then as an aviator. What does that really mean? Well, first, we want them healthy for their own sake. They're fellow human beings. We want to make sure they're good to go. But then we want them to be able to function and perform their assigned tasks in a deployed environment. Now, that can make it very different. Now, a deployed environment could take you to Germany. It's not going to be a problem. Or it could take you to the Horn of Africa or the mountains of, well, not now, Afghanistan in the past. So that makes a big difference. Can we send them anywhere? If not, we have duty restrictions on them. And finally, we want them to perform their aviation mission successfully with the least risk to themselves, their fellow crew members, and innocent people on the ground. So if you want to kill yourself, that's okay. But if there are other people in the aircraft, no. And people on the ground, we've all heard stories about people in single pilot aircraft having emergencies and not being able to safely eject, which would have saved them because their aircraft might crash into a school or some other occupied area, and they would ride the aircraft into the ground, sacrificing themselves for others. We'd like it not to come to that. Okay. I demobilized in 2010, and a year later I retired. And I thought my seniority as an Army officer and a PA and the duration of my service would have given me an appreciation of the VA's assets and the disability evaluation process. I was mistaken. I didn't know what I don't know. I still don't know what I don't know. Does anybody? First thing I learned that was of interest to me is that there's one Department of Veterans Affairs, but it has numerous components. I didn't know this was all the VA, but it's not. There's the Veterans Benefits Administration, the Veterans Health Administration. These are the two that I interacted with at the end of my career. At age 67, I took advantage of the VA's educational benefits for the first time. Can you imagine? Yes, I was the oldest person in my class by a lot. That's okay. And one other benefit that I'm not rushing to take care of, but I'm really glad is there, is burial benefits. So taking care of our own from service, end of service, and on. Now, as I look back at all this, I wonder, do I see a parallel between reserve component medical care and active duty medical care versus the VA's Disability and Health Administration? They're both sort of occupational preventive medicine versus therapeutics. So on the reserve side, we couldn't treat you. On the disability side, it's my understanding we don't treat you. And on the health side, we do. So having been through a number of these evaluations, I was pretty impressed. Now, I was a little disappointed that none of my evaluators were PAs. I was talking to Kristen about this. Physicians and one nurse practitioner, and they all did a very good job and took care of me. And there was something I didn't really know, and I still don't know. They do an evaluation and submit paperwork. I don't really know where the paperwork goes. Right now, I'm waiting for some additional work that's from the end of December. So I don't know what kind of black hole they went into, but I have every confidence that it's going to be acted upon. Within days of my initial submission, I got a notification that they had it. Fortunately, none of these things are life-threatening at this time. But one of the things that my VA exposure has reinforced in me is gratitude. Gratitude that our comrades are getting assistance, that we have not failed them. They're getting what they need. Also, gratitude in that we have learned to look past the visible. All injuries are not visible, and we learn to look past that. And that's hard to do. In medicine, we're so wound up in looking at a body, talking to the person that occupies that body, examining them, finding what's what. But that's not always visible. I mean, I know if we walk through a VA, before we walk through the VA, let's not forget the people who didn't make it to the VA, those who gave their lives in service to our country. But even those who did not give that ultimate sacrifice gave pretty significant sacrifices. You go to a VA, you'll see people who are not sighted, can't hear, missing limbs, paralyzed. When I see them and I know that I'm disabled, it just, what can I say? I have so much. And whatever. One other thing about the VA is that despite my relative complaint about timeliness, I found the VA very responsive, especially for a large organization. But being large and complex, change can take years, but changes can happen. 9 days ago, the PACT Act was expanded. And this is going to provide a lot more coverage for a lot more of our fellow service members, our veterans. Kristen, I'm sorry to say this, but I know you're overworked now, but prepared being a whole lot more overworked. And hopefully that work can be picked up in large part by more PAs. I know we can do it. We do it all the time in every environment. So let me leave you with the acknowledgement of our debt that what you and other folks who do this have done for our fellow veterans and for me. It's not taken for granted. And one last thing, people will often say that they can't or won't, just wasn't compatible for them to provide uniform service. Well, you don't have to. You can fulfill your responsibility of citizenship by exercising your franchise. Please vote. That is the end of my prepared remark.
General, this was absolutely fantastic. And you have a unique perspective of being both a PA and a veteran who's gone through these. And so one of the things I struggle with when I'm seeing veterans is that they're taking their entire military story and it's condensed into an hour, sometimes 2 hours. And so I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts or any kind of best practices as you've gone through your disability claims around making sure that the veteran is seen and heard and that they're not feeling like they're just another number and going through the process?
When I came off my deployment in 2010, they had us meet with a whole bunch of folks to help us adjust. And there was someone there from the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, and they were extremely helpful in getting things going, because otherwise, I don't know, if you know the regulations, you can go to the VA's websites and their place will tell you exactly what to do, but you've got to go through a number of layers of things. And if you're not computer literate or comfortable, it's difficult. I was able, I know for myself, to go through those sites and see the details, and then from a clinician's perspective, write things up to make it easy, I hope, for the disability folks to do what they did for me. And another thing that's changed, when I got my initial rating, it was mostly orthopedic. But later on, actually the day before my retirement party, I received a diagnosis that was life-altering. I was told I had a murmur.
Hmm.
A lot of people have murmurs. I'd never heard that before. I was seeing my primary care provider to get my FAA flight physical back uh, active, and he heard a murmur. And we didn't think much of it. And we said, well, let's get an echo. It's an appropriate thing to do. But there was no urgency. A couple of weeks later, I'm laying in a cardiologist's office, and the echo tech has a probe on my chest, and I'm looking at the screen. I had a little bit of familiarity with echocardiography, and I stopped breathing because I saw an almost 6 centimeter ascending thoracic aortic aneurysm.
Hmm.
That shouldn't be more than like in 2.5 centimeters. And I knew from my experience in surgery and anesthesia that that's not a good thing. You can look the wrong way, you could burp, and the aneurysm could rupture, and you would be dead. And we had no reason, we had at that time, no reason to, there was no etiology for that. I'm clearly not Marfan's. I mean, I'm 5'4" now. I was maybe 5'5" then. Fingers, clearly not a Marfan's. No history of aortic disease in the family, and it just didn't make sense. The surgeon was also, at the time of surgery, excuse me, after surgery, told me that the aneurysm was extremely friable and probably would have ruptured in a couple of weeks, and that the femoral artery cannulation site was not normalized. It was a vasculopathy. And from what? And there was no information about anything. And lo and behold, about 10 years later, we realized that burn pit exposures can be associated with this. So, sort of know the why, but we didn't. And it took a while. And as you know, they're from Vietnam, Agent Orange issues not acknowledged for years and years and years. Gulf War syndrome, not acknowledged for years and years and years. But now things are acknowledged, and we're going to take better care of our service members, at least be more fair. So things can change. You just have to live long enough.
Can I add something if I may?
Please.
And Shep, basically, he gave a great discussion. And you kind of also forgot that you kind of led the way in aviation medicine for the Army and everybody else. But I think the most important thing I found out as a PA, but more importantly as a patient in the VA, is what you talked about as far as records and paperwork. A lot of veterans go in to be evaluated without recognizing that the VA might not have everything. And it's crucial, I think, as an interviewer, as an evaluator, to kind of share with them two things that you mentioned. One is paperwork is vital. As they think about their past history, paperwork is really, really important. If they don't have it or haven't presented it then, maybe they can find it later. And the second thing is the VSOs, the veteran service officers of each of the organizations, the DAV, the Vietnam Veterans of America, whatever, do a tremendous job in helping people who either don't know what they're doing to apply or to appeal for their claims. And they're very, very helpful. I've worked with a lot of different organizations, and I belong to one, Vietnam Veterans of America, and I know the folks that we have are just incredible. And they meet 3 times a year to talk about what they can do more on a national level. And so I think they're a very, very good resource for veterans if you want to just drop the fact that if you're allowed to and if you want to, just drop that fact to them that the veteran service officers are really, really good if they belong to a veterans organization, the DAV, VFW, et cetera. And particularly for the newer veterans who are dealing with the consequences of the PACT Act, these folks have been really, these men and women are doing a tremendous job in trying to give the information about what people need before they go for their evaluations, their claim evaluations. So I just thought I'd point that out.
That's great advice to share, Ken. But I need to point out, I'm retired. I'm not participating in that except as a patient.
Me too.
We made it, bro.
Yes, we did, bro. Hurrah.
What kind of background was actually beneficial to do the disability exams?
Yeah, I can jump in with that. As the general commented that PAs are made for this and we're perfectly qualified for it. And I think your PA background in and of itself, it sets you up for this. But ideally having familiarity with orthopedics, occupational medicine, but then you'll go through the training that's required for a lot of it's self-paced and online. And so you'll become familiar with the verbiage and things. But I'm a professor of PA education, so I practice about 3 or 4 times a month doing this kind of work clinically. And the one thing is the VA always has a specific question. And so you're going into it primed with, kind of what is it that they want you to look at. And so you're going into it kind of aware of that as well. And so, but also I've got vets that are scheduled 3 or 4 weeks from now. And so I've got plenty of time to sit with the charts and, do the dive there, but also familiarize myself with the literature. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts about this is that, we don't make diagnoses, we don't prescribe medications, but we do provide expert opinion. And with that, they want sources cited. So they want us in the literature. And so, when I went into this thinking like, am I going to be able to scratch those intellectual itches of mine? And I would say through and through, because my physical exam skills have significantly improved, having done this now for, I guess, 1.5 years or so. And then also just knowing what the literature says about these things. And as the PACT Act is changing and more is coming about. And so kind of a long-winded way of saying, based on your experiences, you're more than qualified to be a fantastic disability examiner.
Mostly because you care.
Yeah, the benefit of this work is that it can really accommodate any type of background because you're seeing such diverse pathology. And, a civilian or someone with military experience, and medical background, just the caring heart and the desire to learn because everything's changing with the PACT Act. I mean, there's new articles monthly, honestly, about new links, new conditions. A lot of companies offer support too. The 2 main pathways is going through the VA itself for this work. But most of the exams are actually done by private companies. So the big 3 are QTC, VES, and OptumServe. Those are the big 3. And so VES in particular is really nice because it's a 1099 job. And you can really pick your hours. But I mean, at the current employer I work for, it's not uncommon to see 1 to 3 patients a day. And it's just because they have, 20 to 30 different medical conditions we're going over. They're asking for medical opinions, but it's really satisfying too to have that time and not, 20 patients that I'm seeing in a day. And, I still have my DEA from my previous job, but once it expires, I'm not going to renew it because I'm not prescribing anything. So there is no DEA requirement for this job. All that's required is basic life support, national commission and certification of PAs, and state license that's active. And and then supervising physician is requirements are determined at the state level if you're working for a private company that isn't the VA. But over 95% of these disability exam jobs are now done by private companies because there's such a backlog. And like Shepard was saying, with now the acceleration of the PACT Act benefits, where just happened like March 5th, that's going to increase people applying for these claims. Just how many veterans are exposed to burn pits and other toxic exposures. So
yeah, prior to March 5th, the backlog was about 1.2, 1.3 million, and it's only going to continue from there. And just as the Department of Veteran Affairs has some kind of blanket laws around, state licensure. I know of a lot of folks that go and do work in other states for this, and they're licensed only in one state. And so there's some kind of room with that. But you had asked, is it worth it? And I think that, that's probably more of a personal question in terms of where you're at in life. But from a clinical perspective and just job satisfaction, it brings me back to being doc with the infantry and being medic, and just the sense of how wonderful day in and day out it is. That, as Kristen mentioned, a busy day for me is 3 or 4 veterans, often 2 to 3 hours apiece. But they're so packaged into the sense that the VA has submitted to me the military and medical records. I've done my homework. I know more about them than they do sometimes, where I kind of correct them of, actually, I think you were in Kosovo this year and not that year. It's just to have that time. Most veterans tell me that they've never had a clinician spend that much time with them. And so it's highly rewarding work.
I would ask to shadow a PA a day at the clinic. I would, ask if you could start maybe part-time so you can get your feet wet and, see, get familiar with the exams, because it is a lot different than like a internal medicine clinic. And, see what the collaboration culture is. The company Chelsea and I work for, we have monthly meetings with a medical director talking about best practices, latest research articles. So we're not like on our own, which is really comforting with how fast this field is changing. This field is totally different than it was even 2 years ago. The complexity of what we're seeing is increasing. What the VA is asking for, it's increasing, the medical opinions. So we're seeing a lot more complicated things than we used to as well. So, and it's only going to continue.
And for others on the call that aren't necessarily doing this work yet, but you're interested or kind of seeing what's it like, at a future talk, we plan to pull up a report, a blank report, and show you and kind of actually work through a mock visit of what that would look like. And then I think once a lot of folks could see that it's not just staring at a blank SOAP note, that there's specifics that the VA has. And as we all know, if bureaucracy is good, bad, or indifferent, there's some of those questions where you're like, I definitely wasn't at the meeting when they decided to include this question because it's absurd, but it's so regimented that you just basically kind of follow your way through until the report's done. So, and we'll demonstrate that at a future session. Part of my standard spiel when I'm seeing veterans is I tell them that it's not my job to tell them if they're going to get the rating or not. I'm not the one who decides that. But what my job is to provide additional details so that they're not just a name and a number to the VA. And that's what we're doing. And that's what PAs are trained to do. It's an excellent history. It's robust physical exam. And then the note stops there because we're not making diagnosis or treatment plans. That's where our colleagues in the VA take that. So there's a bit of a misnomer too with that I'm doing some literature search on a talk I'm giving some veterans that only 5% of veterans receive their care exclusively from the VA, and 40% of all veterans have never stepped foot in a VA facility. And so more and more, it's the civilian side. And when I say civilian, I mean those not affiliated at all with veterans. It's those types of clinicians that are seeing these folks. And that's where it's important that we get the profession on board with being comfortable seeing veterans, because they're not just going to the VA, they're seeing everybody.
When a disability is determined and the VA accepts, whatever your exam findings were and the whatever percentage rating or whatever that they're given, are they then automatically entered into the VA system for follow-up, or are they lost again to private sector?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's lost to private sector, but that the idea is that more and more of the red tape's being removed so veterans can be seen and whoever can see them. But to answer your question, once a condition has been linked to service, so it's a service-related disability, then they are entitled to VA care, which is free services for them. So, but I see quite a few veterans that have a disability, but they still see their civilians, in which case they just have to submit the records on their own. But the idea is whoever can see it and whoever's going to get you treated well. So with that, I'm showing it's a little after 8, so I just want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time. But General, we certainly appreciate your time and attention today, as well as for everybody else on the call. And we'll certainly continue the dialogue and the momentum as we move forward.